All right, welcome to Two Sons Podcast. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope all of you guys had a great week. New digs.
New digs.
We got some new digs.
I built this myself.
I want to throw a special shout out to Luke because he came over last night and we spent 3-4 hours
Took way longer
putting
than
all this
expected.
stuff together. And, thankfully the football game was terrible because we were not able to watch with all the IKEA-ing that we were doing. But this studio obviously is a multi-purpose studio. I know there's a lot of you guys who just listen to Two Sons who are Star Wars fans and fantasy fans in general. But this is also my everyday place of work for the volume where I cover the NBA. And so this studio carries an extra layer of importance for me. And it meant a lot to me that you took one of your nights off.
It was fun.
And
we had some pizza. It was just a good old
guys night. Little
Yeah.
guys night. But
not bad.
This is so much bigger than the old studio. The circulation is better in here. It just
The chairs
feels
are better.
No offense, it's better to have you a little bit further
I know.
away.
This feels more conversational too. This
Yes.
feels great.
Yes, it's great. I am completely thrilled with how it turned out. And this is going to be where Two Sons Podcast is recorded for the foreseeable future. It's
Yeah.
going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. On that note, this was my favorite episode of Rings of Power by far.
There's a
to
lot that
this
happened.
point.
Yeah. Adar. I was half liking him, and then I started hating him again.
That scene was my favorite scene in Rings of Power so far. Like that, I've talked to you about this a lot, but to me, the villain is everything.
Yes.
When I think about my favorite video games of all time, I tend to lean towards Mass Effect because the Reapers were such a fascinating villain to me. The Marvel movies, and I'm not even a Marvel kind of guy really,
Yeah.
but I really enjoyed the Marvel series because Thanos was such an interesting villain, and the whole concept surrounding Sauron is so fascinating to me. And when Adar was breaking down for Galadriel, the way that Sauron kind of weasels his way into your brain, that was A+ television. I thoroughly enjoyed that scene.
And then again, we see this a lot actually in this series, but the old Uno reverse card happened where Galadriel was like, dude, he wants you to bring his army to him. Don't do this. And he just didn't listen, right? And he was
actually right there though. So Sauron seemed to be Adar seemed to be hinting to Galadriel that Sauron is already fooling Galadriel with the rings and everything like that. Whereas Galadriel is trying to say to Adar, Sauron's fooling you by bringing this army to bear.
Right.
So who's fooling who?
They're both fooled. This is Sauron's game, right? And we know that he wins because we know that he gets his giant army of orcs somehow.
Yeah, that's
and
a good point. Is we know that he eventually has orcs fighting on his side. So inevitably, Adar's children end up fighting for Sauron eventually.
And
to
he
your
was
point.
savvy with how he got it out of Galadriel too, because he ended up learning who had her ring, and then he also learned who Sauron truly was, which is Halbrand, right? And then not only that, he learned where he was. So he got all of that out of her just by just talking with her.
And he actually said that to her too. He's like, I've already gotten everything I need.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating to me because I've loved the kind of focus on the kind of objects that are imbued with power. And that kind of in the context of the way that Tolkien kind of tells a story. So I haven't told you this yet. I've been saving it for the pod, but after I finished the Thrawn books for the 5th time, I was like, what am
Speaking
I
of villains,
Yeah,
speaking
that's
of
a
villains,
great
though,
example.
the greatest villain.
And
One of them.
And and that's also a great example of how when a villain doesn't necessarily seem like a villain, that's kind of what makes a cool villain,
For sure.
for all the Thrawn and Knights out there. But yeah, when I finished it, I was like, what am I going to read? And I was thinking about maybe doing there's a novelization of Attack of the Clones that I thought about reading because we're going into that Labyrinth of Evil book.
Yeah.
But I ended up doing the Silmarillion instead.
Oh.
And Andy Serkis does a 10 out of 10 amazing job narrating it. Highly recommend to anybody who wants to kind of get into the Lord of the Rings lore a little bit. And I'm a good chunk into it now, but I've been primarily learning about some of the origin story and there's Iruvata, who's essentially God, right? And how he creates the Ainur, I think is what they're called, but they're basically the Valar. And there's like 7 male versions and 7 female versions. But like one of them, this Melkor, ends up basically being. It's so funny how like Tolkien used to talk about how like it's not a corollary for the Bible when it's so
and everyone's
obviously
like,
is.
Are you sure, dude?
Yeah.
Also, he's like very
this
Catholic
Melkor
too.
guy sounds a lot like Satan, or what do you call it?
Lucifer.
Lucifer. Sorry, I was blanking for a second.
They're pretty synonymous.
Yeah, they're pretty synonymous. Yeah,
I think people understand.
But like the one of the things that's really cool is they talk a lot about Melkor and how he becomes. Melkor and Morgoth are essentially the same being. And one of the things that I like as I was reading the book, I started like kind of doing a little bit more online research, and there's all these like illustrations of what Morgoth looks like, or Melkor looks like, and he basically looks like Sauron in so many different ways, and I'm like, that's interesting.
Do you think it's because of the crown?
It's because of the crown.
Okay, yeah.
So he refers to the crown, because we all know that crown from actual Lord of the Rings movies as the crown that Sauron wears when he's in his physical form, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was really cool to have it revealed like that's actually Morgoth's crown, or Melkor's crown that Sauron ends up taking. And like when Adar tells the story of how he uses Melkor, the power of Melkor's crown to actually, or Morgoth's crown to actually defeat Sauron, I thought that was such a cool scene. And there's that interesting kind of that moment there where Galadriel's like, you bring the crown, I'll bring my ring, and we'll use these 2 objects that are imbued with power to defeat Sauron. And specifically what's cool about the Silmarillion when you're reading it is there's this major focus on creation, including power, meaning like, for instance, like the creation of the world, that like it's literally sung into existence.
Yeah.
And when you kind of look into that, like there's these beings that create, like the Silmarils, for instance, like they were created and they were so beautiful that they carried this power. And it's the same thing for the Rings of Power. You see, it's the scene where Celebrimbor is like drawing different designs and it's like, this isn't good enough, like scratch it out. It's like there's like a beauty element in like what makes these things powerful. And Morgoth's crown is terrifying.
It's terrifying. Yeah. 2 things that were really, really cool about the crown revealed. Number 1, Galadriel's just straight up repulsion as soon as she saw it.
Oh, yeah, dude.
She was literally leaning away from it. So that was so cool to see as it just gets revealed, right? This artifact, if you will. It reminded me of like a Sith artifact almost. With
exactly.
Just the nastiness that
that's
it
actually
carries,
a great corollary.
Yeah. And then number 2, we always talk about this on this show, but the world building. It was so cool that we get to understand the significance of that crown leading into this, right? It is so cool that we get to see Adar almost kill Sauron with this crown. And then it gets revealed to Galadriel, and it just made it so much more important. And it just took the extra, 5-minute scene of Adar striking Sauron with it that made it that much more cool to see it again.
Such a great way to start the season.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that is like just, that's one of the things that Rings of Power is doing so well is just the world building. I get that some like huge Lord of the Ring fans aren't loving it, where you and I are kind of like stupid when it comes to Lord of the Rings, so we just get to sit here and enjoy it, right? So it's just cool though. Like they're doing a great job with that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of differences between the Star Wars side of things and the Tolkien side of things, in the sense that like with Star Wars, the purity is a little bit more open to interpretation because like everything is relatively recent, and like up until the last 20 years, there wasn't really much in the form of expanded universe content, right? What makes
like George Lucas is still alive.
Yeah. The Tolkien's works sat and marinated in society for the better part of a century before we started making movies and stuff. And so like for the real Tolkienites, I get it. Like you probably had a very strong opinion about how this was supposed to look.
Which is totally reasonable. Yeah. Because we've been there with Star Wars.
Yeah, of course.
Like we've totally been there. Not to beat a dead horse, but like we totally get what it's like. It's just kind of nice to be ignorant.
Exactly.
Like every day that I go to turn on Rings of Power, I'm just like, this is going to be cool. What's the story? I don't have any expectations, which is super nice. And that's not always the case when you're like really into something. And it's making me get into the Lord of the Rings. Like it's making me gain this huge appreciation for it. And I feel like almost like a fraud because I'm like just now leaning into it, but I'm loving it. Like I'm loving literally every single second of it.
Yeah. The world building in this episode was really good. I did think it was kind of hilarious that Galadriel started being preachy to Adar at the end about the bringing the army. And it's like, you've been literally because he kind of puts her on the spot. He's like, it's Halbrand, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, because he knows in the back of his head is like, I literally watched you put King's armor on him and like call him the King of the Southland. Like you fell hook, line, and sinker for all of his shit
for sure.
And now you're coming at me like and preaching at me. It was completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that was definitely my favorite scene of this episode. And,
it was great.
And that was epic. The second
seeing the power of the
scene,
orcs too.
Oh yeah,
not to cut you
How
off,
many
but
there were,
and I was hoping so bad that we wouldn't see the battle at the end of this episode
because the way they set it up was perfect.
Yes, I was hoping so bad it wouldn't just be pushed into the end. Like I'm really looking forward to that battle, so I'm really glad they didn't reveal that.
The episode 8 is definitely going to be epic, and I think it might only be an 8-episode season. So I think that's actually the finale that we're getting next week.
Dude, that happened fast.
I know, right? We're gonna have to come up with something else to cover, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
The Penguin actually released last night. I think Carly and I are going to check out episode 1 tonight, and I'll let you know if I think it's worth looking at.
Mm-hmm.
But the second really cool scene in this episode, which I also thought was very, very cool, was when so there's this really interesting dynamic that takes place where Celebrimbor kind of has like a meltdown. and when he has the meltdown, like essentially like the people of the people of Eregion like come to get Celebrimbor's help because there's this rapid approaching army of orcs, right? And
people are going missing.
There's no more mithril. All this shit is hitting the fan, right? And so, like, essentially, Anatar basically is like, you just stay in here and work on this. Like, I will manage your affairs, essentially. And
they chilled out on Anatar's blush, by the way, this episode.
Did a little bit.
Yeah. No, sidetrack. Anyways.
But like, and it was classic Sauron too, where like it almost came off as Celebrimbor's decision at first. Where it was like, I need to stay in here. Like I can't go talk to them. Like he's like off the rails completely. But it's also very clear that like Sauron is manipulating him too, where it's like I'm gonna make your hammer disappear. Now it's gonna reappear.
Oh my gosh,
all this like little stuff. He's like, and I thought it was really cool because they set the stage for this at the end of season 1 when Galadriel identifies that Halbrand is Sauron, and then he immediately like snaps and takes her to this vision where they're on the water again, right? And so it's very clear. Carly, it's so funny. Like Carly, my wife. She's irritated by how powerful Sauron is.
What? Why?
And I'm like, that's what's cool about this. Yeah. Like, but she's like, he's too powerful. Like, this is completely unfair that he can do all this stuff. And I'm like, I know that's kind of the point. Like, this is kind of the point. Yeah. This is very token-esque here, you know.
That's what makes it special, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah,
and it's part of like the art of what Tolkien's works are, which is like it is a little bit exaggerated and over the top with a lot of this kind of stuff. But
AKA fantasy.
Yeah, AKA fantasy, exactly. Carly's wrong. My wife is wrong about this. So what was really fascinating is he goes out, right, and he starts like he basically tells all the people like I'm in charge now. He goes on his little side mission to I can't remember what it's called, but Durin's home underneath the mountain.
Right. Khazad-dûm.
And Khazad-dûm, thank you. And he goes to Khazad-dûm, and he clearly like does something manipulative to get some mithril.
He ends up with it somehow.
Yeah,
even though King Durin said no.
Yeah, which he could have either grabbed it himself, or he could have like gone straight to the dude who's in charge of the actual like digging.
Yeah, there's so many ways he could have gotten.
So he gets all that shit, and he goes back, and then Celebrimbor hears a sound and has like a meltdown and is like, I'm gonna go check this out. And like Sauron tries grabbing him and he tries stopping him from going outside. And then there's this kind of weird scene where like clearly Sauron starts tapping into his dark magic
big time.
And when Celebrimbor opens that up and he walks outside and it's like peaceful,
he's like, it's heaven. It's literally heavenly. All of a sudden it's daytime.
Yeah. And like there's a couple of interesting elements there. One, he gives him the mithril, right? 2, and I'm not 100% sure about this yet, and I will probably know more after I get further into the Silmarillion, but I'm pretty sure That's Feanor's hammer, and Feanor, I think, was the elf that made the Silmarils. So I think because remember, he already had that other hammer.
Yeah.
And then he like gave him like the fancy hammer,
like,
and he
slightly
goes
bigger
like,
too. So it's better.
It's bigger, it's better, it's more ornate. And he's like, and he basically goes to him like, it almost seemed like he said like, you need to make something that is prettier or that surpasses the quality of work of the Silmarils to be these rings of power. And like that whole scene to me was so cool, the way they tied it all together, and it was like classic Sauron, like classic top tier Sauron.
It was. Two things too. Did you catch that when he was talking to Celebrimbor, he's like, you just need to do this one last time.
Yep.
If you were Celebrimbor, wouldn't you be like, huh? What do you mean? Well, just once? What? Number one. Number two, at first I was like, oh man, Celebrimbor is so weak. Like, Sauron's in his head. Yeah, Sauron's in his head. He can do whatever he wants. Like,
yeah,
can
Sauron
you
has him wrapped around his finger.
Yeah, could you envision trying to fight that? Like, no one could fight against that, really.
If he could
like,
literally
that is not
change
his fault.
what you see, are you kidding?
Right. There's literally no way that you could like just a normal elf, let's say, let alone a normal man, could ever fight against that. And then the last thing too about that scene in particular is it was so cool when the reveal happened, when things went back into night.
Oh my gosh, it was perfect.
And when it turned into chaos, like it was super special. Like that's all I can really use. That word, like, special, is all I can use to describe that scene, because it truly was. It was like really special.
The way they timed it right as it was like getting into his line of sight.
It's perfect.
And then it kind of like ties in perfectly with what Adar was saying too, in the sense that he finds a way to weasel in by trying to identify what you want.
And he does that beautifully.
Exactly. And it's very clear, Celebrimbor, what he wants, what drives him, is very much a desire to complete a work of significance.
Right.
And again, this goes back to like literally the very beginning of this whole Silmarillion concept, where it's like, when Iravata sends the Valar down to Middle Earth, like, essentially the way I interpreted it from reading the book, and I'm sure there's some people that have again are more familiar with it, but essentially from what I understand, like, Iravata basically gave them the freedom to create things, and that Manwë and Aule, I think, is the other one, but like there's these two specific Valar that like were doing most of the creation in the kind of positive end of things, and then like Melkor or Morgoth is creating all of the darkness and evil that's in the world, and so it's very clear, like, for an elf like Celebrimbor to create something of significance would be a massive driver of like his sense of fulfillment as a being,
for sure.
And so like Sauron basically weaponizes that to poison his mind.
Yeah, and he does it to Adar, and he does it to Galadriel. So he's using all of these people's wants and desires into just weaponizing them. And not only that, one of Adar's points is he's actually giving them what they want.
Yeah.
He's just bigger scheme than what they can even envision or handle.
Adar straight up says that. He's like, it ends with you getting what you want. There was a line that Adar used that I thought was so classic, and it was excellent writing, and just round of applause to the people who made this show. When Adar goes, he even lets you think you have his power for a minute. And when he said that, I immediately thought the rings.
Yeah.
Because like, there's this power that Galadriel has, that Durin has, that Gil-galad has, that all these guys have.
Yeah.
And like, they've convinced themselves, like Galadriel has convinced herself, like, the ring, they have the power with the rings. They are in control of it. It's all theirs. That's what they've convinced themselves. And that's like legitimately crazy when you think about it, because that falls in line perfectly with what Adar says, which is like, he lets you think you have his power. But then to Galadriel's point, it's like, well, what about this army that you're walking around with, buddy? Because that's like, you think you have Sauron's power there too.
Exactly. And not only that, but to your point about making you think you have what you want, is even King Durin. King Durin thinks he has what he wants, which is all these like this fortune now. And then that's just decaying him. It's decaying his soul, right? The dwarves storyline continues to be my favorite arc of this series.
The acting in that storyline is so good.
Yep.
The I thought the conflict in Durin the Younger is so good in the sense that like I loved the scene where he was talking to his wife and he's basically like, when I look at him, I still see my dad.
Right.
He's distant. What was the two words he used? He said distant and something. But like he basically says like he's in there.
He still sees him.
Yeah, but I think he's just lost. Like he's distant and he's lost, but he's in there. And that very much is like a kind of a corollary to like the Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader kind of concept too. Like there's still good in him kind of thing. And
that's a great comp.
But yeah, like there's that scene where Durin like tries to run up on his dad and grab the ring, and then he just gets like power blasted across the room.
Yeah, the behind the doors conversations that Prince Durin and Disa have are really cool.
They're so good,
right? Because it just is such a good example of how conflicted Prince Durin actually is and how hard that position would be, because he's towing this line where he doesn't want to embarrass his father in front of their entire kingdom. But at the same time, if he allows his father to continue down his path, he'll lose him eventually anyways. Right. It is so cool.
There's a lot of like heavy emphasis on like things are already going pretty far south.
Yeah. It happens fast.
Like the giant piles of gold that are just ending up. And what's
the Balrog that's underneath them as we speak.
The jewels that they're finding too. What's weird about that to me is like in theory, if they were mining, they would just be finding raw materials.
Right.
So like what I was thinking is like I wonder if that falls in line with the tax that he's levying on everybody.
Oh, where they're having
like
these like wheelbarrows of
paid.
coins and like chalices that they're dumping in front of him.
And he's charging the other dwarves for shit too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I guess a hefty like half
kingdoms.
Half of their income almost. So he's just getting super rich.
Yeah, beyond what he needs even.
Yeah, that's kind of not to get too real world here, but like no, like can you imagine like let's say you're the richest king in all the land, but all your people are poor. So you're just surrounded by poverty and anemia. Like that goes into the real world too. Like you think of these like dictators that are just incredibly wealthy, but then they're just surrounded by not the greatest stuff. Like that is such a vibe kill if you're like a super rich person. Wouldn't you want to just be able to like jot down the street and go to like an amazing world-class theater or something like that? But like you can't do that if all your people are poor.
Yeah.
So the fact that like he's doing that is so stupid to me. And it's actually something you see in the real world, which is super unfortunate.
To that point, like Durin the Older had a certain jovial nature about him in the earlier, before he got the ring. And honestly, like, it's been fascinating to see like the way that they've the actor portraying the older Durin, King Durin, has like kind of channeled this. Like he actually looks profoundly unhappy.
Yes.
Like, the only
he's
time
super stoic all the
time you see the spark come out of him is when he starts talking about how he's going to get more gold.
Yes, I know. You're right.
That has like a really dark connotation, and it some parallels to the Hobbit movies when the what do they call it, gold sickness or whatever it's called. It is definitely a fascinating storyline. I'm curious to see where that goes to, because like obviously Durin the Younger and his wife are not going to have any real impact in slowing down the digging efforts that are there.
Yes. So and they're just so heavily hinting at the Balrog. Right?
Oh, for sure.
Like when Sauron's down there with them and he looks into the flame and he sees it.
Like sees it, yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah, it was an opportunity for them to drop another Balrog sighting.
I keep finding myself, exactly, right? I keep finding myself like when I saw the Balrog, right? I was like, ooh, no. But then I was like, let's see this.
Yeah,
I really want to see it go down. That was the same with Queen Muriel. Like, at first you didn't want to see the sea creature. You're like, no, don't go in there. But yeah, let's see this. Like, I want to see what this looks like.
So let's move to the Numenor storyline. It was interesting. I saw a tweet from somebody that I follow, a basketball person, that said like, loving Rings of Power, but like this could have been 3 completely different shows, like the downfall of Numenor, the Path of the Stranger,
Yeah.
and then the Rings of Power. But like my thing when I heard him say that, I disagreed, and the main reason why is like that was kind of what made Game of Thrones really cool.
Yeah,
was like you were constantly hopping from, and they would stop in a storyline and spend 10-15 minutes there, like a good long scene, and then like it would almost feel like this dramatic shift as you would go to this other storyline.
And also if you had to wait a week.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Or in some cases 3 weeks to get back to a storyline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my thing is like, as long as you're actually invested in all the storylines, it works. And like,
right.
And I would argue the only storyline they go to right now that rings a little dead for me is the Stranger storyline.
That's getting better though.
But it's getting better, and like, and we're going to talk about it here in a minute. But like, it got better in this episode.
For sure.
I am interested in it. But like, when they go to Numenor, like, I'm fascinated by that storyline.
Yeah.
When they go to anything involving the Rings of Power, I'm fascinated with that storyline. Like, I'm appreciating the jumps, and like, to me, that's part of like what makes a really good TV show is like when you have multiple storylines that you're deeply invested in.
Dude, that's how good books are written too, right? Like our favorite Bane books, with the different trajectories that each character is going through. Like it hops around. That is a good read. Number one. Number two, like seeing an hour-long episode with 3 stories in it is so much better than seeing 3 separate episodes that are only 20 minutes each.
Oh, for sure.
Because it is so hard to get into the story sometimes, especially when it's really, really short. Like there's times when I'm watching a lot of the new Star Wars content. Like
the Star
even
Wars stuff is
Andor.
brutal.
I loved Andor. But
the 30-minute episodes are brutal.
I knew the episodes were like 26 minutes sometimes. So I would feel myself think about that. I knew I'd be like 15 minutes in on an episode and I'd be like, okay, like I know the ending is just around the corner for this episode, and it kind of takes you out of it. So the fact that you can just sit in as if you're watching a movie, like a shorter movie, like it makes it very palatable in my opinion.
The Star Wars stuff has been brutal, and it's because they completely are lacking the deep dialogue. Like,
yes,
Andor had a little bit of it, and Andor is one of my favorite shows that Disney has made.
Yeah, Andor is good.
And if I remember correctly, Andor had some longer episodes, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, they did randomly, I think.
That concept gets tough. Like you need to take time to tell these stories. But the other thing too, in the last part I'll say about it before we get back to Numenor, is like these things are connected. Like there are a bunch of Numenorians who end up making their way to Middle Earth and having an existence there, and they end up leading the men there. Like they are the kings of men, basically, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure exactly the details, but they do eventually make their way over there. Like the Gandalf or whoever this wizard character is obviously going to.
You're calling him Gandalf already.
Always
the stranger, Jay.
Well, dude, I think it was your brother who said like they
Grand Elf.
said Grand Elf.
Yeah,
like, and that is actually a really interesting kind of like driving force behind that.
It would be annoying if the directors intentionally had us be misleaded for that.
Oh yeah.
No. Like I don't like it when the narrator is intentionally misleading with stuff like that. Like I get that you want to have cliffhangers. I get that you want to just not reveal everything all at once. But if a narrator is intentionally like letting people down by doing stuff like that, it's super, super annoying.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And honestly, like I've seen people in the comments be like, that's actually the Dark Wizard. And I'm like, how?
We see the Dark Wizard. So
you're going to spend seasons worth of time telling us about how this person has a benevolent kind of side to them.
Right.
When Sauron the entire time, or the Dark Wizard the entire time, is clearly malevolent. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to do it that way. Like, I think they're clearly setting up Gandalf. But let's talk about Numenor for a minute. So, I'm actually going to come out of left field at you here. Is Muriel queen again?
I don't know.
What happened at
the
end
all
of that
it just
scene?
takes.
I don't get it.
She got burped out of the water, and then she's queen again.
Yeah, like
she's back,
what the
baby.
hell happened there? And like
the townspeople are annoying. 1 second they're like Pharazôn, and the next it's like Queen Muriel. She got burped out. She's back.
She got burped out by the sea worm, and now she's fine. Like,
dude, it's like a sea rhino.
If they don't continue to have conflict surrounding who's in charge, if they come back into the next season or next episode and Muriel's just queen, I'm going to be a little annoyed.
That's a little
because that was a little bizarre
for sure.
There's also
the Valar picked her though.
Yeah, and like I mean, also that would be the like one of the most royal fuck ups ever, because they were just going to kill Elendil or lock him up or something.
I know. No, they were going to kill him.
It was their idea to be like, let's feed him to the sea worm.
Yeah.
And these are the same people that like Al-Farazon got named king because an eagle showed up.
I know.
To the kinging or whatever. So like they know
that eagle was there for Muriel though.
Exactly. Yeah, it very obviously was.
Okay.
But and it was very well played theatrics on their part. To try to snatch that power. But like it doesn't take a lot of critical thinking for Al-Farazon to be like, okay, like I touch this orb and I start seeing crazy shit, including the Eye of Sauron.
Yeah.
Okay. And like an eagle literally showed up to this thing. So like maybe if you bring the mythical sea worm that decides what the gods want, you're now putting the decision-making power in their hands and not in your hands. Like that was
right, bro. That was a really
poor decision-making on your part.
Super, super dumb. What an idiot. Dude, again, a biblical reference though, Pontius Pilate. Right? Like allowing like the people or some other entity to make your decision for you. And then being like, "Oh no, I don't know if that's a good choice."
Go the way that I thought it was gonna go.
Another like straight up biblical reference. How hilarious!
But Elendil's character is really fascinating. I think
he's cool.
I'm really curious to see how that ends. I thought the scene with him and his daughter, where he basically said, like, if all you see after this is my pride, then we have nothing more to say to each other.
Do you think she's going to come
really
around?
Interesting. I don't know. I think she might be a little bit too far gone.
I think she's going to come around. Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
See. I would have a hard time accepting her back on the good side.
Yeah. But she's surrounded by a-holes, right? But she hasn't been a true a-hole yet. Like she's had the Kool-Aid and she believes in it, but she's not a bad person versus the other people that she's surrounded by who are just bad people. Straight up.
She stole the seeing eyeball thing.
Yeah, but not because she was trying to be like devious or bad and like have like a power shift
happen. She drove the coup.
Unintentionally.
Unintentionally.
I want our viewers
idea.
Hey, I know, but again, like she's not doing it for herself though. She's literally doing it because like she was heartbroken about her brother being killed and because she thought her government she thought her government in a way was like going down a path in which other people were at risk, including her father, right? So I think she comes around. I really do.
I'll be curious to see how they end up handling that, especially with only one episode left too.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna see that. I don't think we're gonna know for sure this next episode.
I'm not sure.
I don't think she's gonna come around entirely before episode 8 or after episode 8.
I actually saw something on Instagram. I did not do any digging. But apparently, like the viewership for Rings of Power has been so poor that they're considering canceling it. If they do, I'm going to be so bummed because I'm actually more invested in this than I am even in House of the Dragon at this point.
Dude, it's been so good.
And like I want to be like Bezos, dude. Like,
just do it for us. I give you so much money.
Can you please just like another? They want 3 more seasons. I would be like 1.2 billion, please. That's all we need. 400 million per season. Like, just
sell part of your yacht and give us Rings of Power, please. Just Airbnb it for like 3 weekends, and we will have Rings of Power again. Do it for us.
So I thought the scene where you go to the Forest of Staves with Tom Bombadil and the stranger was really cool.
Good segue.
The look of that like forest of all the craggly looking sticks potential. I thought that was cool.
That was really cool. Again, a lot of people don't like the way that Tom's being portrayed, but I'm just dumb. I love his character. Yeah. He's how could you not like him?
Well, he's so unbothered. Can someone tell me how this is bad, Tom? Like, is he not singing enough? Like, is he like what is? No, I'm serious. Like,
no, I know, but that's
what's
so
wrong
funny.
with this Tom Bombadil guy? Because he's like clearly likable. He's
very likable. Yeah. Well, and he's already been like forgotten in the past by the movies, anyways. So the fact that he's back again, I feel like that would be a good thing.
Yeah, Peter Jackson left him out because he just didn't play a significant role really in how things were told. And, like,
is he not singing enough?
And it's like,
Jay, that was so funny.
Like the other thing too is like you got to take it from this perspective. Like Peter Jackson made 12 hours worth of Lord of the Rings movies and then another 12 hours worth of Hobbit movies. Okay, so like there's 24 hours of the Third Age. in live action, and none of it was Tom Bombadil. So like clearly, like he didn't see it as significant enough. But like regardless, I think there's some clear Star Wars corollaries with like the Empire Strikes Back. Luke starts having a vision of his friends in danger, and then he has to leave. Totally, and Yoda says, "Don't leave your training. You got to finish your training." And Tom Bombadil does the same thing. But Tom's is like so much more straightforward. He's like, Sauron is rising in the west. The Dark Wizard is rising in the east. Like all of the people in Middle Earth are in serious trouble if you don't do something. Come on, man.
Your friends die anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was my question for you is, do you think that he goes and tries to save Nori, or do you think he tries to go get his staff?
So what's ironic about this is, what's Nori's friend's name?
Poppy.
Poppy puts Nori on the spot when Nori wants to turn herself in and basically goes like, this is bigger than you. True. You know everything is going poorly. He needs to be trained as a wizard. Like, so it's very clear Poppy wants the stranger to stay and train with Tom Bombadil. But I think it's pretty clear that he's going to leave.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think he's going to leave and go help the girls.
Obviously, the correct answer, in my opinion, is that he stays.
Yeah,
I'm hoping
I think so
he
too.
stays.
It's dumb that he would leave. Yeah.
They just spend the next episode him just picking up twigs and setting him down.
I'm ready now.
Yeah. Poppy's snake. She needs to chill out with that thing.
Dude.
How uncomfortable did that make you? That was driving me insane. And then it just was irrelevant. And I thought that was hilarious that they just made it a non-issue.
I'm trying to remember.
So when she's talking with her boyfriend, right? And she's holding the snake in her hand.
She was holding his snake that scene? How did I not notice that?
Where are
I remember her like
You're
being
oblivious.
like, dude, your breath smells like lizards.
They're fanging the... No. They're... What is it called when we get venom from snakes? There's a term for that.
Oh, like
where they harvest
venom?
Yeah, where they harvest the venom.
She was doing that?
And Jason and I know this too well because we're literally surrounded by rattlesnakes here in Tucson. Like my parents have seen 4 at their house in the last like 3 weeks, by the way. But yeah, so she's holding the snake the entire conversation. You need to go watch it again.
Okay,
and then they're like kissing,
is it a real snake?
And she's holding the snake. Well, it's like it's animated.
Okay,
but
it's an animated.
It's super distracting.
You probably just have her holding the thing the whole time. The snake's just like,
dude, it has the vibes of a diamondback rattlesnake.
Oh,
different
really?
color. But yeah,
I think I'm starting to remember
Diamondback.
the snake a little bit.
Oh yeah, because they're
so much happened in that episode that just like over my head.
Yeah, you need to check that out. It's super funny.
I thought the scene of and I'm blanking on her name, but the leader of the halflings that live in that canyon.
Mm-hmm.
What do they call them again? It's not the Harfoots. It's the.
I know. It starts with an S, right? The Stogs.
The Stores.
Stores.
When she gives that speech when she gives that speech about like how essentially like, hey, like every important thing that's happened to me in my life has taken place in this place. Like I will die here and they will bury me under this tree.
Yeah.
Like, and when she talks about how she married her husband underneath the tree and that she buried her husband underneath the tree and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was like a really, really cool monologue.
It was. I think maybe a setup for, despite having roots somewhere, it's okay to let go and move. Yep. I think is what the full story is there. Yeah, it's hard to let go sometimes. It's hard to leave places. Like,
yeah, for sure.
I grew up in an amazing community, Prescott, Arizona, and like it was hard to move from there. But at some point, I was just like, you know what, ready to make a change.
Well, to that point too, like, and I know it's a little different because Prescott was a small town, but it's not that small of a town either.
It's
like, there's a community. There's a real community there. But like I would imagine, because I remember this when I moved to Charlotte. I didn't stay in Charlotte long enough to like really put roots down. But like you have like real roots down here now. Like
roots.
Your kid is born here. Your other kid's about to be born here. Your parents now live here. They've moved here. Like obviously you're my best friend. We've been friends for a long time.
We have a studio together.
Our wives are very good friends. We have a studio together. We created something. Like our wives are really good friends. Like we've just spent a ton of time, and like now you're really entrenched. But I'm sure there were times earlier on where like Tucson still felt foreign to you, you
right?
know?
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a challenge. Like it takes a long time for a new place to become home.
It does for sure. It's actually for a while it was nice because I could just go to the store and not know know anybody. Now I go to the store and see people that I know, which kind of sucks.
Tucson is the world's biggest small town.
It is.
Like, the population's like 1.1 million in the metro area, but like literally like everyone knows everybody.
It's so small. I had a new student work under me one of my recent shifts, and they're like, yeah, like I used to work at the ER at X, Y, and Z, and she was like talking about one of her friends. And I was like, oh, like the friend that you're talking about was literally roommates with my wife in college. It is such a small world. And it got even smaller because then she was like, oh, that's so interesting. And then she name dropped another person that I knew that was also my student at one point. And like like that is such a coincidence. It's crazy.
I know. This town is big, but it's crazy how connected everyone is. And I think a big part of it too is like Tucson has no freeway system.
Yeah.
So like everyone kind of sticks to their community. Like we're in the northeast side of town, and like we just like we don't go to the northwest side of town very often. You know
almost
what I mean?
never. Yeah, almost.
I lived in Charlotte, and it was like a spider web of freeways. It was like you went all over the place all the time because it was just you were always 15-20 minutes away from everything.
Yeah, it's nice. So I like the pocket nature.
I want you to get moving on Labyrinth of Evil, so that we can talk a little bit.
Cool.
I'm about 5 chapters in on that, but maybe we can do some Star Wars content next week too.
Let's do a breakdown. We had one of our subscribers who's been with us for a really long time suggest that we did like our favorite characters. I think we should do a top 3 favorite villains of Star Wars, because we've been talking about all the villains of Lord of the Rings, and I think I know who yours are, and I think they're probably the same as mine.
I think we would probably land on the same ones too.
Yep.
Do you have anything else for today's show?
No, dude. I think that's it. It was a great episode.
All right, guys. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. As always, we will be back in about a week for the season finale of Rings of Power, and then, as he mentioned, we got some Star Wars content on the horizon, and then we're gonna find something to cover this fall. There's that. Like I said, there's the Penguin. There's a couple of other shows that are coming out, and then also. There's a couple of like major movie releases this fall that I want to look into too.
One would be a fun one that we probably won't do. Sorry for everyone that started Mr. and Mrs. Smith, because we just never finished that. Only Murders in the Building. I'm loving it. We're in season 1 right now.
Okay, I've already seen the first 2-3 seasons. So not the new one.
We're way too behind on it, but that would have been so fun, because that's actually like digestible, where like you've got to break it down and you can have your theories and stuff. That would be a fun one.
Yeah, when you get caught up, if you ever get caught up, we can talk about it on
It's
the show.
good. It's really good.
All right, guys. We will see you guys in about a week.
Thanks a lot.